Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Bit of a uplifting story here. We're going to turn to Sara, chairman of TuNur, one of the largest scale solar export projects in the world. Kevin, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Max.
All right, this is a really interesting story. You have a massive solar project in newly liberated Tunisia. Tell us about the project. When did it start? How much will be invested? And when does it start producing energy? It's a lot there, but...
Well, I guess we started back in 2009. It was still before well before the Arab Spring. And I guess when we'll start producing electricity in 2016. It's still a few years away, but we're delivering that electricity to Europe through a submarine cable through Italy. And it's a huge, actually it'll be the largest single foreign investment that Tunisia has ever seen. It's a 10 billion euro project.
All right, so let's talk about the technology just for a second. It's not actually solar panels, from what I understand, but reflective mirror surfaces are pointing toward water. The water boils and it turns a turbine, basically, correct?
That's right, Max. We're using a technology called CSP, solar thermal. And basically, they're fields of mirrors that concentrate the sunlight to a solar tower, to the point of a tower where, as you described, it boils water, makes steam, and then that steam generates electricity, just like a nuclear power plant. But instead of using nuclear fuel, we're using the sun as fuel. And then we also, and this is the big difference than with the solar panels, we're able to store the heat at night. And so we can continue generating power after the sun goes down.
So how does this compare with, let's say, another new technology that's out there, fracking, which is geological fracturing, where my understanding is it's an energy negative technology, and it's very short-lived, and there's environmental catastrophe. How does the energy production stack up against fracking, another new technology? Is it more efficient?
Well, look. It's completely different. We're talking about a renewable energy. Once we install this stuff, it just keeps on producing energy for free forever. Very small operation and maintenance costs. Fracking, I mean, and okay, the other aspect, and this really compares well with fracking, the environmental impact is minimal. You know, we don't even, for our mirrors in the desert, we don't even have to put in concrete foundation. We just like screw these big metal screws in the ground, and we hold our mirrors like that. So it's a really, you know, we can keep the environment intact. And fracking, there's a lot of environmental issues. It's not clear whether it affects the water table, and we're sitting on top of a huge aquifer. And the last thing the Tunisians want is any threat to that aquifer having it polluted.
Right. Now, of course, the Middle East, you've got the big players in the oil business. But do you see some of these bigger oil countries in the Middle East becoming bigger players in solar? What kind of export of energy is possible for the region? Because, you know, in Saudi Arabia, for example, they're developing nuclear plants. They see the oil taps running out at some point, and they don't want anybody prepared for the day they don't want to export so much, etc. Is solar going to be across the region? Is there any talk about this?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the Saudis, because a few weeks ago they announced the largest solar program in the world, including solar thermal. You know, they're going to be installing more solar thermal than solar PV, because they understand with the panels you can't generate electricity 24/7, but with the CSP it's a technology that's evolving, and you'll be able to really provide what they call baseload power. You know, power around the clock that you can use for industry and residential uses, especially when the sun goes down. So they've announced the largest CSP solar program in the world, and so we are seeing these oil producing countries getting into the solar power business simply because they're starting to consume more and more oil. It's hurting their export revenues, and they're keeping an eye on their national budgets.
Kevin, Sara, your background is actually in banking and finance, and actually you and I were on Wall Street about the same time, and we've kind of gone through the last 25 years watching global banking and financialization become the dominant force in economies around the world, and to some degree push out other businesses. And so my question is, projects like this, solar projects, is there capital available for these projects, is sufficient capital, or do we have this problem of most of the capital flowing to this coterie of banks that are involved in interest rate manipulation, interest rate scandals, everything that's going on in the banking sector that's causing everyone, you know, heart palpitations? Is this crowding out some of the projects in the solar industry going forward? And do you see that changing?
No, let's face the facts. These big solar deals and even wind farms are only closing because of the involvement of governments, export credit agencies, and multilateral institutions. They're the ones who are really providing the backbone of financing for large solar and renewable energy projects today. The banking system is not doing the job that it should be doing. They should be out there financing this energy transition, financing the large solar projects, the large wind projects. And they're there, but very timidly, and only if a multilateral steps in first and there's some kind of credit support or credit guarantee from a state.
Multilateral referring to?
Well, the European Investment Bank, for example, they just led a big financing of a wind farm in the North Sea. We're seeing in North Africa for large solar projects, it's really the World Bank Group, which is playing a key role in putting down the initial money. And so then, timidly, the private sector banks come alongside underneath the cover of the World Bank, and then they require additional cover, getting some kind of export guarantee credits from the nations that they come from.
Let's talk about the economies of scale for a second in geothermal and solar and geosolar. The world is facing a huge credit crisis. The IMF is beating its chest saying that austerity measures must be imposed on various countries and there's a credit crunch everywhere. And of course, the economy, number one business of the globe is oil business, oil and energy business, and the banking businesses that go with the oil industry. The economies of scale of using this type of technology, this type of program, what kind of impact would it have if there was a global effort actually to wean the globe off non-renewable oil and switched over to this type of technology on a macro basis? Macro banking, put your banking hat on a macro basis, the hundreds of billions of euros that are being talked about needed to bail out Europe and other countries, would it have a significant impact on swaying those numbers in a significant way if this type of initiative was put forward, if you get my question?
Yeah, it would. And in fact, the Germans are doing it. They've made the choice. They want long-term sustainable economy and sustainable energy. They believe in renewable energy. They believe that they can just completely cut down their oil and gas import bill by investing massively in solar and wind. And they're doing it. They're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're still, they're basically the last man standing in Europe, and I expect them to remain that way.
Yeah, let's talk about Germany for a second, because their reaction to the Fukushima disaster was to shut down all nukes.
That's right.
Japan has just restarted a nuke again.
Yeah, and it's controversial in Japan.
And but Germany is taking the political decision to say, no, we're not going to go down this path anymore. And they are, I believe, have a goal of being energy renewed by renewable sources, independent completely within a certain time frame. Other countries in Europe also have a similar goal of being completely energy independent, generating renewable energy within a certain time frame. Is that working? Are these countries getting to that goal? And what are maybe a couple of other countries that are on the same mindset?
Yeah, Switzerland is on the same mindset, I think. And Germany is definitely leading the way, and I think they're going to get there. At one point, they were producing half of their power from solar panels, a sunny day a few weeks ago. And they do have some challenges, and they have to make some adjustments to their grid, invest a little bit in the transmission infrastructure so they can move electricity to where it's needed. It's not always being generated. That's the thing with the renewable electricity. Where the sun is strong, you're getting a lot of a hot spot of electricity there. When the wind is strong in a different part of the country, you'll have a hot spot of electricity there. So you got to be able to move these electrons around to where they're actually needed. And Germany needs to make the investments, and they've recently improved a very large investment program to make those investments. And also, there's a new technology which the German companies are starting to invest in on a massive scale, which is energy storage. I talked to you a little bit about at the beginning of the interview about how CSP is really interesting because you can store the heat and then release it at night. Well, in Germany, they're trying to figure out a way to store the electrons you even generate from wind and release that when it's needed at night or when the wind is not blowing. And so once Germany masters these new technologies, improves their grid, they often call it the intelligent grid or the smart grid, and integrates these new storage technologies into their grid, they're home free. they don't have to pay any more money to anybody for their energy requirements. And they're going to be, and what their game is to obtain market and industrial leadership in these new technologies and export it around the world like they've been doing for technologies in other sectors for the last 100 years.
Okay, let me ask you a bit of a mixed question, a philosophical question. The world is facing unprecedented toxicity in the global banking system. And we have revelations that banks like Barclays and others have been engaged in massive fraud. And the result is, A, it's about some rogue elements within the banks that are doing a few one-offs and bad things. Or B, is this banking industry, can you make the equation to let's say an Exxon Valdez, when it hit that coast of Alaska, it spilled millions of gallons of oil and it created a pollution, a toxic event. In this case, a bank like Barclays is releasing toxic derivatives, toxic practices. Why doesn't Greenpeace cover Barclays as being, in other words, the banking industry needs an environmental upgrade because they are releasing risky toxicity into the system? Because I ask you this because you straddle both worlds. You're on Wall Street, you're doing renewable energy. What do you think of that idea?
Well, look, I think that we have crossed some kind of Rubicon with this Barclays, especially if there's any collusion on the part of the national authorities. Now,
well, Bank of England.
That's where everything falls apart. Because who do we trust now? And then if there's any collusion in the U.S. between the administration and some of the big Wall Street firms, then we have a real problem. Because the citizens can no longer trust their governments on the very, very basic fundamental tenets of the economic structure. So, you know, what's there? What can we believe in? So it's I think there's a real citizenry crisis of confidence which is emerging. You know, we're going to start seeing, I don't know what the repercussions are going to be. But I mean, if I was in banking, I'd want to be in a bank that basically took deposits and made loans and knew their customers, and that's it. None of this other stuff.
Well, France is thinking about rolling out just such a bank.
Yeah, and that's probably a good idea. And to get back to our earlier comments about Germany, that's what they do in Germany. They've got a big state-owned bank called KfW, which is accredited to keeping their small and medium-sized businesses strong and giving them export credits where they need it.
Right, KfW. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it more, but we're out of time. Kevin, Sara, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Hey, thanks, Max. It's a pleasure.